So, in the last story, we saw a reference to life is living a long life, worthwhile. Um, so now we get into the Hound. In my tortured ears, there sounds unceasingly a nightmare whirring and flapping, and a faint distant baying, as of some gigantic hound. It is not a dream, it is not. I fear even madness, for too much has already happened to give me these merciful doubts. St. John is a mangled corpse. I alone know why. And such is my knowledge, that I am about to blow out my brains for. Fear I shall be mangled in the same way. Well, it could be said that suicide is never an escape from the horrors. Down, unlit, and illimitable corridors of eldritch fantasy sweeps the black, shapeless nemesis that drives me to self-annihilation. May heaven forge the folly and morbidity which leads us both to so monstrous a fate. Wearied with the commonplaces of a prosaic world, where even the joys of romance and adventure soon grow stale, St. John and I had followed enthusiastically every ascetic and intellectual movement which promised respite from a devastating ennui, the enigmas of the symbolists, and the ecstasies of the pre-Raphaelites. All were ours in their time, but each new mood was drained too soon of its diverting novelty and appeal. Only the sombre philosophy of the decadents could help us, and this we found potent only by increasing gradually the depth and diabolism of our penetrations. Baudelaire and Huysmans were soon exhausted of thrills, till finally there remained for us only the more direct stimuli of unnatural personal experiences and adventures. It was this frightful emotional need which led us eventually to that detestable course, which even in my present fear I mentioned with shame and timidity. That hideous extremity of human outrage, the abhorred practice of grave robbing. I cannot reveal the details of our shocking expeditions, or catalogue even partially the worst of the trophies adorning the nameless museum we prepared in the great stone house where we jointly dwelt, alone and servantless. Our museum was a blasphemous, unthinkable place, where the satanic taste of neurotic virtuosi we had assembled in a universe of terror and decay to excite our jaded sensibilities. It was a secret room far, far underground, where huge winged demons, carved in of basalt and onyx, vomited from wide grinning mouths weird green and orange light, and hidden pneumatic pipes ruffled in kaleidoscopic dances of death, and the lines of red charnel things, hand in hand, woven in voluminous black hangings. Through these pipes came at will the odors of our moods most craved, sometimes the scent of pale funeral lilies, sometimes the neurotic incense of imagined eastern shrines of the kingly dead, and sometimes, how I shudder to recall it, the frightful, soul-upheaving stenches of the uncovered grave. Around the walls of this repellent chamber were cases of antique mummies, alternating with comely, lifeless bodies, perfectly stuffed and cured by the taxidermist's art, and with headstones snatched from the oldest churchyards of the world. Niches here and there contained skulls of all shapes and heads, preserved in various stages of dissolution. There one might find the rotting bald pates of famous noblemen, and the fresh and radiantly golden heads of new buried children. Statues and paintings there were all of fiendish subjects, and some executed by St. John and myself. A locked portfolio, bound in tanned human skin, and certain unknown and unnameable drawings which it was rumored Goya had perpetrated, but dared not acknowledge, and there were nauseating musical instruments, stringed brass, and wood on which St. John and I sometimes produced dissonances of exquisite morbidity and cacodemoniacal ghastliness, whilst in a multitude of inlaid ebony cabinets reposed the most incredible and unimaginable variety of tumult ever assembled by human madness and perversity. It is of this loot in particular that I must not speak. Thank God I had the courage to destroy it long before I thought of destroying myself. Now, you don't destroy yourself, you're never going to recover that way, but it's said that the devil complained of scriptures and rituals done unto God, and to him was the musical instruments. And some people literally play musical instruments like they're praying, even to the point of like I forget what the people of Ahul something, the people of music, they had rendered the Quran they had translated it into a musical scale, and yeah, so instead of reciting scripture, they play the musical instrument instead. There are people in India, a much more common thing in that faction of culture, that they they think of religious themes and play music accordingly. Well, a lot of people do that. In the West, they do that, but you know what I mean. Like in their mind is a scripture, and that directs what they're saying. The predatory excursions on which we collected our unmentionable treasures were always artistically memorable events. We were no vulgar ghouls, but worked only under certain conditions of mood, landscape, and environment. Weather, season, and moonlight. These pastimes were to us the most exquisite form of aesthetic expression, when we gave their details a fastidious technical care. An inappropriate hour, a jarring lightning effect, or a clumsy manipulation of the damp sod would almost totally destroy us for that ecstatic titillation which followed the exhumation of some ominous, grinning secret of the earth. Our quest for novel scenes and piquant conditions was feverish and insatiate. Dr. John was always the leader, and he it was who led the way at last to that mocking, accursed spot which brought us our hideous and inevitable doom. By what malign fatality were we lured to that terrible Holland church? I think it was the dark rumor and legendary, the tales of one buried for 5 centuries, who had himself been a ghoul in his time, and had stolen a potent thing from a mighty sepulchre. I can recall the scene in these final moments, the pale autumn moon over the graves, casting long horrible shadows, the grotesque trees drooping sullenly to meet the neglected grass, and the crumbling slabs, the vast legions of colossal bats that flew against the moon, the antique ivied church pointing a huge spectral finger at the livid sky, the phosphorescent insects that danced like death fires under the yews in a distant corner, the odors of mold, vegetation, and less explicable things that mingled feebly with the night wind from over far swamps and seas, and worst of all, the faint deep-toned baying of some gigantic hound, which we could neither see nor definitely place. As we heard this suggestion of baying, we shuddered, remembering the tales of peasantry. For he whom we sought had centuries before been found in this same spot, torn and mangled by the claws and teeth of some unspeakable beast. I remembered how we delved into the ghoul's grave with our spades, and how we thrilled at the picture of ourselves. The grave, the pale watching moon, the horrible shadows, the grotesque trees, the titanic bats, the antique church, the dancing death fires, the sickening odors, the gently moaning night wind, and the strange, half-heard, directionless bang, of whose objective existence we could scarcely be sure. Then we struck a substance harder than the damp mold, and beheld a rotting oblong box crusted with mineral deposits from the long, undisturbed ground. It was incredibly tough and thick, but so old that we finally pried it open and feasted our eyes on what it held. Much, amazingly much, was left of the object despite the lapse of 500 years. The skeleton, though crushed in places by the jaws of the thing that had killed it, held together with surprising firmness, and we gloated over the clean white skull and its long, firm teeth and its eyeless sockets that once had glowed with a charnel fever like our own. In the coffin lay an amulet of curious and exotic design, which had apparently been worn around the sleeper's neck. It was the oddly conventionalized figure of a crouching winged hound, or sphinx, with a semi-canine face, and was exquisitely carved in antique oriental fashion from a small piece of green jade. The expression of its features was repellent in the extreme, savoring at once of death, bestiality, and malevolence. Around the base was an inscription in characters which neither St. John nor I could identify, and on the bottom, like a maker's seal, was graven a grotesque and formidable skull. Immediately upon beholding this amulet, we know that we must possess it, and that the treasure alone was our logical pelf from the censured grave. Even had its outlines been unfamiliar, we would have desired it, but as we looked more closely, we saw that it was not wholly unfamiliar. Alien it indeed was to all art and literature, when sane and balanced readers know, but we recognized and the thing hinted of in the forbidden Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, the ghastly soul symbol of the corpse-eating cult of the inaccessible Lang in South and Central Asia. All too well do we trace the sinister lineaments described by the old Arab demonologist. Lineaments, he wrote, drawn from some obscure supernatural manifestation of the souls of those who vexed and gnawed at the dead. Seizing the green jade object, we gave a last glance at the bleached and cavern-eyed face of its owner and closed up the grave as we found it. As we hastened from the abhorrent spot, the stolen amulet in St. John's pocket, we thought we saw the bats descend in a body to the earth we had so lately rifled, as if seeking some cursed and unholy nourishment. But the autumn moon shone, weak and pale, and we could not be sure.